Hello all, my name is Jamir. I'm a software developer at Thoughtworks, and I care passionately about UI development. I work in the past years with a lot of different front-end web technology, and today I'm really excited to be here to talk to you about front-end ops. So this talk is mainly a journey towards my definition of front-end ops and why I think it's an important concept in the context of building web user interfaces today. I'm actually not the one who coined this term in the first place. Around 5 years ago, Alex Senton was already speaking about front-end ops in a Smashing magazine article called The Front-End Operation Engineer. He believed that already at that point we reached a stage in the front-end operation space where there was a need for a new role in teams to be created. So in the article, he mentioned things like front-end operation engineers would own external performance. They will have to master task runners like Grunt, bprosat versioning, caching, etc. And although I don't agree that a new role in our teams is necessary to take care of all of these front-end operations, I have to say that back then, Alex observed a lot of interesting problems that are still very valid in today's front-end landscape. And this is the agenda for today's talk. As I said before, I want to bring you on the same journey that I embarked to get to the definition of front-end ops. So hopefully you will walk away from this talk with an understanding of what is front-end ops and why you and your team should care about it. So in the first part of the presentation, I will show you how modern front-end works look like today and how it evolved, especially in the latest years. By the end of this part, we will understand the main challenges that modern front-end applications bring to us. Then I will move on to the second part of this journey. Here I try to find solutions to these challenges by zooming out a little from the front-end space and observing if we can apply some lessons learned from other areas of our industry. And the last part of the talk is also the more concrete and practical one. We now have a solution to these challenges, and it consists in a set of front-end ops practices that I will describe before concluding with the definition of front-end ops that I came up with. So I want to start with a question. How did front-end development evolve in the latest years? Let's try to visualize this evolution on a timeline starting from 1995 until today. The web was really young and JavaScript wasn't really a thing, and we had only server-side render static pages. Then Netscape Communication had this vision that the web needed a way to become more dynamic. They wanted to introduce a way to create animation, interaction into the browser. They needed a small scripting language that could interact with the DOM. This scripting language should not target actual developer, but more designer and non-programmers. Also, Java was getting popular in 1995. So at that time, they believed that it would be cool to have in this new language a Java-like syntax. And that's how JavaScript was born, a small scripting language for non-programmers that can interact with the DOM. 10 years later, jQuery was released, a very imperative scripting library built on top of JavaScript, which solved a lot of cross-browser issues at the time. That was great because we all know how tedious it can be to have to write different versions of our code to support different target platforms. jQuery also made easy to do asynchronous requests initiated by the browser. So now JavaScript started to be used not just to do simple animation anymore, but also to provide new content without having to refresh our pages. And 2009 is where things get interesting for the JavaScript community. Node.js was born, and JavaScript, the client-side scripting language for non-programmers, can now be executed also on the server side. From that time on, an enormous amount of front-end tooling has been created. Unit testing JavaScript finally started to be a thing. AngularJS came out, and we started to see more and more single-page application. So now all the interaction with the server happens without refreshing the page. Fetching and managing data, switching routes is all managed by JavaScript in the client side. And today we have web components. We have libraries that provide beautiful abstraction of the DOM. I'm personally a big fan of React. Like, it makes develop, my view, like such a smooth experience. Today is also the time of progressive web application. Thanks to things like service workers, we can today offer to our user native-like experience in our web application. We can build push notification and all sorts of offline capabilities. Today, with IndexedDB, we can even have a database in our browser. If I put in a graph complexity over time, this is the curve that I would probably draw to represent the rise of complexity to build web user interfaces over time. So I hope that I convince you that today, in order to build fast, reliable, engaging user experience, a lot of the complexity has moved from the server to the client, which in the web is, of course, the browser. So I don't want to oversimplify things, but in the early 2000s, a web application would have probably looked something like that. A universal monolith with the server-side render view. Perhaps some JavaScript would be loaded in the page to make it a little bit more dynamic, some animation, but nothing more than that. Eventually, things in the backend start to get too complex to be handled on a giant monolith. And solutions like this one here started to emerge. Backend services will be split in several independently deployable services, hopefully built around different company business domain. Then an aggregation layer will be put on top, perhaps GraphQL or an API gateway, and so that the front-end monolith could consume the data coming from these services. So that's better, but we are still not doing microservices right in this way. So today we are seeing more and more organizations starting to adopt what here at ThoughtWorks we call micro frontends. In this case, the web page is composed by including different frontends developed by different teams. We finally have an entire independently deployed and maintained verticals. Teams are autonomous, but with a great degree of autonomy come also great responsibility. It's not easy to partition complexity on the front without compromising user experience. And in here, I want to give you an overview of common pitfalls I often see in modern front-end projects. Server render blocking assets. So this is the classic mistake of putting some script tag to download some JavaScript at the top of our HTML pages without using, for example, the defer keyword. The browser will stop rendering the page until the JavaScript is downloaded, parsed, and executed. Missing a cache busting strategy. So, well, you know, cache invalidation is famous to be one of the hardest things to get right in software development. For this one, in the worst case, your user will not get the new version of your assets after a deployment because their browser still uses a cached version of them. Generating a minified production bundles. This one really explains itself. Maybe you feel overwhelmed by all this JavaScript tooling and you don't realize that you are shipping a development bundle of one of your library instead of a production optimized one. Serving uncompressed web assets. Today we have really powerful compression algorithm like Brotli or gzip that helps a lot to make the packets that we send over the wire way smaller and therefore provide content to our user way quicker. And I've been in situations where neither of these compression algorithms were used. Over transpiling and over polyfilling. So for the one of you that are not familiar with the process of transpilation and polyfilling, you can think of them like the steps which are necessary to make our modern JavaScript code understandable by older browsers. I often encounter a situation where JavaScript bundles were transpiled and polyfilled to support IE8, for example, even when the target platforms for the app were just the latest version of Chrome and or Firefox. Generating massive GOT bundles. So GOT bundles for me are bundles that include libraries, frameworks, application code, all in one giant file without having any code splitting strategies in place, serving unoptimized images. This could be serving unnecessary big images. Perhaps don't adopt any lazy load strategy. Don't use the new WebP format to compress images for supported browser. What capabilities are required in teams today to overcome these challenges new modern front-end work bring to us? And what I think is a common pattern currently is how more and more growing companies are trying to move away from their monoliths in favor of a microservices architecture. So things like building cross-functional teams around a product, not a project or a technology. Adopting the Amazon philosophy, you build it and now you run it. Automatized path to production, etc. You can see how the microservices architecture paradigm is promoting a culture where teams are more autonomous and the decision-making process is decentralized. This approach, as you can imagine, requires a high level of maturity in team and a different variety of skill set as well. And I enjoy reiterating through the microservices prerequisite article by Martin Fowler when I was preparing the presentation. So in the article, he said that in order to use microservices, you as an organization need to meet some key prerequisites. You need to ensure to have things like rapid provisioning, basic monitoring, rapid application development. But most importantly, you need a DevOps culture in your teams, a sense of shared responsibility between the development and the operations part. And you might ask, okay, Jamir, but how this even relates to front-end? Well, in the front-end space, we have a problem of culture. Our developers often not feeling responsible for providing great experiences to our user. Maybe the other team members don't consider front-end seriously enough. And I'm not alone to think this. Rufus Raghunath, a colleague of mine here at Orthodox, recently wrote an excellent post in our company Insights where he explained why dividing front-end from back-end is an anti-pattern and often gets in the way of shipping great products at a fast pace for our users. So what do teams really need to be successful in the era of micro front-ends? Well, my answer is a front-end ops culture. Everyone in the team should have an understanding of how front-end operation can impact the final user experience. This does not mean that everybody needs to be an expert in everything, because it's practically not possible in a cross-functional team. But everybody should be open-minded enough to pair with a front-end specialist and learn about how important is front-end to create fast, engaging user experience. We are now entering the final part of our journey, where I would like to introduce you to a set of practices you would expect to see from teams which have a mature front-end ops understanding. So 6 years back, Grant landed in the JavaScript ecosystem to help perform automatically frequent tasks, such as minification, testing, etc. You generally have a Grant plugin for each tool you want to use. So if you want, for example, to minify your files, you would have a Grant Glyph.js plugin that you could use in your tasks. I think that NPM or Yarn script are powerful enough to run tasks and often are easier to live with. So we already have so much tools in the front-end space that I feel I'm better off without Task Runner in my project. So my recommendation is to stay away from task runners. And here you can see Grant, Broccoli, and Gulp, for example. And actually use the tools that you need directly with an NPM or Yarn script. So today, we can use the latest ECMAScript features without having to worry too much if a specific target platform already implemented it or not. This is possible thanks to transpilation. Here you can see TypeScript, ClojureScript, and Reason. And today we also have a CSS transpiler called PostCSS that allow us to use latest CSS feature like CSS custom properties, for example, in older browsers. And an interesting theory, which is emerging this day in the JavaScript community, is about turning front-end frameworks from runtime libraries into optimizing compilers. Tools like Webpack, they bundle your assets together and they offer a high degree of configurability. They actually do more than this. They're able to exclude from your bundle unused code with a technique called tree shaking. They can source map your code. They help you split your asset in chunks and achieve code splitting. And bundling things together is not enough when we ship web assets to our user. You want them to be as small as possible. Today we have a plethora of tooling to make our files smaller. The first step is generally to minify our assets like with tools like Uglify or CSS Nano for CSS. And another important thing to do is to make sure we use a compression algorithm like gzip or Brotli before shipping them to the browser. And we know JavaScript is a dynamic language, and because of its nature, use linting tools like ESLint becomes really important to keep our code bases consistent and maintainable. If you are on a team that does not have a lot of JavaScript expertise, I found really useful to also use a code formatter like Prettier. It allows people to focus more on actual problems, on the actual language, and less in discussing about formatting conventions. Probably testing and monitoring are the most important front-end ops practices. Find a robust way to measure the experience your user will get from your application is essential to keep improving. For example, you can analyze size of production bundles on your CI pipeline to avoid introducing unnecessary library by mistake. You should test the speed of your application methodically using tools like Lighthouse, SpeedCurve, or web page test. The last practice I want to cover is about developer experience. As you saw, there are so many things to take care of in the front-end operation space today that it can be overwhelming for team members to have to deal constantly with all these configurations. That's why I really like toolboxes like Create React App, for example. They provide solid defaults for your application and abstract away all configuration needed for things like linting, transpiling, etc. And let the team actually focus on actually shipping features. At the beginning of the presentation, I promised you that I will be finishing this talk by giving you the definition of front-end ops that I came up with. So there we go. Front-end ops is a combination of practices and tools that makes delivering optimized web assets more efficient. A front-end ops culture enables teams to ship new UI features at a fast pace with the confidence of not compromising the final user experience. If your team is adopting front-end ops practices, your users will thank you. And that's all I have. Thank you very much.